We're live, Marcel. So I'll introduce myself first. So my name is Bruno Scott. Pronouns are he and him, and I'm a people manager in the certification and verification team. And I'm based in the UK, as anyone listening can get by my accent. Based in Bristol, but we've got our London hub in London, of course. So yeah, and obviously working for the certification and verification team, we are the guys that take the company's assessments who wish to become B Corps, and we have to work through their documents and their answers to verify whether they can hit that kind of 80 benchmark to then go on to be a certified B Corp and join the B Corp community. So that's me for this chat. Marcel, over to you to introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks, Bruno. Hey, everyone. My name is Marcel. I'm from Brazil. Today here in London. I'm the head of global policy. Um, I have played different roles in the B Corp movement in the last 13 years. Firstly, as a B Corp founder, working with impact investing. So in the last decade, my organization has supported over 100 startups in Brazil to reduce inequalities and address the climate crisis. Um, then I set up Sistema B Brazil 10 years ago and contributed to the movement expansion in Latin America and the Caribbean, leading as executive director of Sistema B International, one of the first B Labs global partners in this movement. And more recently, I took the role as the head of global policy. My role is basically is to lead, promote, and coordinate policies, regulations, and self-regulations to foster stakeholder governance, which hopefully I think we will talk a lot here.
Yeah. So just a small role then. But I'll just introduce the activity for everyone. We are really lucky to have Marcel with us, not only because he's on the same time zone, as he said, he's in London for once, but also just that amount of knowledge and experience that he's got there. I think this should be, I'm really interested to hear from Marcel with some of the questions I've got, and I think it should be a really good conversation. So that to introduce that activity, this is just a conversation to talk about the breadth of the B Corp movement, really. A lot of people may know about B Corps, or they might know a different part of the work we do, but actually the B Corp movement is much, much broader than one single thing, and it's got all of those pieces moving at once. So the purpose of today is really for me and Marcel to have a conversation about the B Corp movement, about from both our different sides, so from certification and verification and the policy work that Marcel is doing, join those dots a little bit, as it were, try to, see where the overlap is, ask each other some questions about the stuff that we're currently doing. And yeah, just kind of highlight how broad ranging this movement is. And by no means will we cover absolutely everything, I'm sure. It is a huge global movement, and we are only two people within that at the moment. But that's the aim of today, is to have a conversation, ask each other some questions. So without further ado, I mean, my first question for you, Marcel, is why are you in London?
Thanks, Bruno. Uh, I am in London this week because we are part of a strategic partnership, a strategic alliance with the Global Alliance of Impacted Lawyers, GALE. So here, yeah, we are working with impact lawyers from uh, uh, different kind legal instruments to support businesses, capital markets to foster stakeholder governance. So it's a community of practices and Gale Summit place to connect lawyers to redefine the role of lawyers towards a new economic system, as well as to redefine the rule of law. So and change the rules of the game. So I think this conversation today with you, Bruno, is really cool because it's part of a series of different conversations. And this month is a very important month for the B Corp movement. Every single March, we celebrate the B Corp month. And this year's theme is going beyond. And as you who you are listening to this conversation, you probably you are familiar that this movement is about building an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system for all people in our planet. And this movement, in the last over 15 years, has created a proof of concept called certified B corporations. And the work that Bruno and the team in certification and verification do is absolutely important to make this happen. And today we're going to share a bit more about policy and how it goes beyond the certification, and how it is important to support every single business in our planet to behave like a B Corp.
Yeah, exactly. Bang on. Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, personally, I learned about the B Corp movement because of B Corps. So as a consumer, kind of 8, 9 years ago, I became aware of B Corp movement. And so I was only really aware of that single strand of what we're doing. And as you say, it's an important strand. It supports organizations to be better businesses, to use business as a force for good. And it is a very visible version of our movement for that kind of consumer to kind of broaden their knowledge and increase their knowledge. But I think you started to touch on it there. But why is it that we can't just do that? Why is it that we also need that policy piece? And particularly, I suppose, with your experience, I'm interested in that from a global perspective as well. So yeah, why is the policy work so needed on top of B Corp? And yeah, really interested to hear about that from a global perspective.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Bruno. I Well, in the last 15 years, more than 15 years, I think we've successfully created a global community of leaders, of people using business as a force for good. There are over 6,000 certified B Corps in over 80 countries from 150 different industries, with this one unifying success in economy, and build this inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system. However, what we have realized is that, according to the World Bank, there are 125 million businesses in our planet. So B Corps are very important, but not enough to change the economic system. So how can we empower all businesses to behave like a B Corp, as I mentioned before, with accountability and transparency? So with the purpose to generate social and environmental benefits in addition to profits, accountability without all stakeholders affected by their decision making, and also the commitment to measure, manage, and report their impact. So policies are important because we can scale these proof of concept. We can change the rules of the game and enable, support, and empower businesses and capital markets to promote behavior change, structural change, and cultural change, and then accelerate this economic transition. And what I think it would be great for our audience, Bruno, to share is a step before policy as well. So uh, if you could share with us a bit more about your work, which is fundamental to make the policy work happen, because you are part of the team that make these happen. I mean, you are in a position to help identify those who are really committed with these new economic segment. In practice, in your day-to-day, how does that work?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So my role as a people manager, I do a few different things, but the main bit in terms of what you're asking about is I do assessments of companies myself, and I also manage a team of analysts who are doing assessments day in, day out. And in terms of what that looks like or how that works, we work with our global partners. So obviously we've got B Lab Global, and then we've got our global network of global partners who are building the movement within each area. So for us, that's B Lab UK, and they will kind of feed companies into our pipeline. So they'll evaluate them, make sure they're ready for assessment, make sure they understand what the B Corp is like, and the work that needs to go into the assessment. It is a lot of work because it covers a whole range of topics. So there's a lot of questions to answer. But the great thing is the companies that we see having gone through that evaluation, they're keen, they're committed to the movement, they're committed to what B Corp stands for. And when we get to them, it's then essentially an audit. So we're doing an assessment of what have they answered, can we verify those answers either through documentation, a review call with the company, which is great. We get to meet a lot of really interesting companies doing really fascinating things, both in terms of what their business actually does, but also how they are stepping up to be a B Corp as well. So they're kind of beneficial policies, if you will, and approaches. And then we, presuming everything goes well, we'll certify that as an internal check, and then it goes back to our global partner for their community team. And I think that's one thing that's really amazing about B Corp is that you get certified, you get your certification, you get your logo, but then you actually also get welcomed into a community. And I think B Corp members are incredibly passionate about B Corp and about using business as a force for good. I recently met an organization who gave a presentation on some of the things that they do that make them stand out within their industry. And it was just fascinating. They were so, given that they don't work for B Lab Global or B Lab UK, they were amazingly passionate about the B Corp movement. And it was really cool to see that. And so I think, the nature of the process means you have to be engaged with it, means you have to be attuned to why you're doing it. You have to need that purpose. But then when you join the community afterwards, you meet and learn about so many more like-minded individuals, and I see businesses improve as they come back 3 years later for recertification. They don't just sit there. They're not just kind of sitting on their laurels. They're really keen to continue to improve their impact, which has just been amazing to see. So, that's the kind of average kind of working day. But there's a lot of variety because each company is different, and what they're doing is different, and the kind of things we have to get our minds around to understand these unique and in businesses as well, and how it applies to our standards is also really interesting as well. It's not just a kind of tick box. You actually have to think through, okay, this is an interesting business model. How does that work with this kind of global set of standards we've tried to produce? So yeah, it's interesting to say the least. I've met some really lovely companies, and read about some really interesting practices and policies as well. It's fascinating what's out there. I've got I won't go into loads of examples because we'll be here for ages, but I think just one quick one is one of the team assessed a company in Australia, and they were based in Sydney Harbour, and their entire office was powered through hydropower from Sydney Harbour. So the building was sort of sunk into the harbour somehow. I mean, I wasn't involved in the assessment, so I don't know the detail. But just like the ingenuity of how we can be better is absolutely fascinating. And that's just on a company level. So I think what's interesting is that the policy side, from what you're saying, that kind of bigger, broader approach can lend even more weight to that, even more support to that. But I suppose I see the challenges for businesses, in terms of maybe they're a very small business, and so that can make them more dynamic, but maybe they haven't got the resource to be able to balance their kind of work with what they're doing right now. So it takes them a bit longer to do the assessment. What's the kind of biggest challenge for you on the kind of policy side, or for the movement on a policy side at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Bruno. I think changing the systems from inside out is absolutely fascinating and hopeful. At the same time, we have important challenges. In case of policy, policy takes a long time to happen, and we have a tremendous sense of urgency now. The level of inequality, the climate emergency we live is absolutely, um, uh, I'd say, that requires a call to action that may not be compatible with the time to implement policies, to articulate, to design, to research, to implement, and to build consensus over the policy. So that requires a time that we may not have. So that's a challenge. So we need to urge policymakers. We need to bring together capital markets and business leaders and civil society, all together to say, hey, we need to change the rules of the game. So since 2010, the B Corp movement has been very successful in passing a policy proposal called the Benefit Corporation. So Benefit Corporation is a corporate form of a company that behaves like a B Corp with purpose, accountability, transparency. So the Benefit Corporation proposal has been passed in over 50 different jurisdictions, over 40 American states, plus 10 countries, and it's counting, and we are still counting. It's a very good proposal. It's voluntary though. So how can we have a mandatory proposal to make every single business incorporated in a specific jurisdiction to behave like a B Corp? This is the next step that we envision for the next this next decade. As part of this proposal, we are also working with meta regulation for those who are more familiar with policy, of policy design, which is like regulation. So a regulation from the market to the market. This another proposal is called benefit index. So we are working with stock exchanges across the planet to implement a whole new index in existing stock exchange to bring together publicly traded companies that are committed to implement stakeholder governance. And I explain stakeholder governance as something like you from the audience, you've heard that the World Economic Forum has changed the manifest for the very first time after 40 years to create the concept of stakeholder capitalism. At the B Corp movement, we talk a lot about stakeholder economy. And there is no way to talk about stakeholder economy if we do not implement stakeholder governance. So stakeholder governance is the infrastructure for the stakeholder economy. That means that we need to engage and consider all of those stakeholders that are affected by businesses practices or their impact model or their business model, and also their decision making in short and long term. So our role at BLab Global is to foster this stakeholder governance concept. So basically the concept can be resumed in three elements. So legal accountability. So we need to have directors' duties connected with the commitment to generate positive impact, but also to consider stakeholders' interests. Also, decision making. So we need to engage and consider stakeholders in decision making, and also the public benefit. So the commitment to generate social and environmental benefits in addition to profit. These are the three elements of stakeholder governance that we are promoting through the benefit corporation legislation and through the benefit index in capital markets. But everything that I just said only makes sense because we have a global community of over 6,000 certified B Corps. And these B Corps, they renew very often, every 3 years, as Bruno said, their commitment to certify as a B Corp. And this process, as Bruno was saying, is very pedagogical for the company because companies have to improve their practices every single day. And our standards also improve every time. So I think, Bruno, it is pedagogical for the companies, but also it is pedagogical for the team for the standards and certification verification team, because it's very, you are on daily basis connected with different businesses from different industries. So what are, I'd say my question to you, if I may, if you could share the greatest thing that we saw recently in terms of practice of a business that connected, you know, something that made you think, wow, this is really a big corp. They are really innovative in the way how they are promoting impact and doing effective impact. And in the other side, is there any blind spot in this process? Is there anything that you think, well, this is something that we are still figuring out, this is something that we are improving? Is there anything that you could share with us?
Sure. Well, I think, like, before I get into a specific example, it was really interesting to hear you talk about the policy piece, because we see that in action in the assessments. So we see when companies sign their legal documents to say that they are going to assume the benefit corporation. And that, to me, every time I see that, I think that's amazing. Particularly the larger the organization that they're signing that. It's not just a person who's signing it for their single trader business. You know, it's someone who's got payroll to consider, staff to consider, you know, all these things to consider, and they're agreeing that they will consider all stakeholders in their daily business practices. And I think every time I see that, I find that amazing. And so it's really interesting to hear that kind of bigger policy piece discussed, because I see it in the kind of practical with the companies every time. So that, I always think, I take my hat off to the companies and the movement, really, when that happens every time. But in terms of, like, maybe a more specific idiosyncratic example of a business, there was one that I've recently encountered that I found really inspiring, which was it was a service provider. So they didn't have a product, they were providing a service. Companies came to them, pitched, so on and so forth. And they had set up their business to be a ethical, sustainable company. So the way they wanted to work was to be considering all of those things. As time went on and they were factoring in you know, payroll and profits and things like that, they started to take on some companies and some projects that maybe didn't actually align with how they'd originally set out as a business. And the members of the team called out the directors in that business and said, hey, look, I'm not sure that we should be taking on this company. I'm not sure they're right. So straight away, that's an amazing thing that they've got that kind of flat hierarchy to be able to have that conversation. But they developed something off the back of that, which enabled them to stick true to their principles. And the way it works was they have a couple of purpose statements, and then they put out, for every bit of business that comes in, they send a questionnaire to everybody in the company at every level, and everybody's vote counts the same. And then you just agree or disagree as to whether it matches both, whether the company and the project brief matches those purpose statements. And if it comes back less than 50%, they don't take on that business. And so it makes sure not only are they sticking true to their principles, but it also means that they've got stakeholder engagement within their company about those principles on a weekly basis when this business comes in. And it means that they said they turn down about 4 to 5 projects a year. And as it goes on, they're becoming known for that. And so actually they're getting clients and projects coming towards them that do align with their policies, their kind of impact statement anyway. But I just found that really interesting as a way to hold themselves accountable, to engage with their actual purpose statement on a daily and practical way, rather than it being, you know, necessarily printed up somewhere but never referenced. And really great stakeholder engagement with the team as well. And so I found that absolutely fascinating. I think in terms of blind spots, probably want to chat to someone from the standards team more, but I think on a kind of practical level, one slight blind spot is the variety of companies and practices that we see. And as we grow and as we get into more regions, do our standards currently, as they sit currently, do they fit into that new environment? And the answer is yes, they do. But do we capture what that company is trying to do? effectively. You know, sometimes you can read something and think this is definitely B Corp. This is definitely, I can totally understand what they're trying to do here, but actually, are they going to get the points that they deserve? Because maybe they're in a different market, and that's a really challenging thing to do in that market. But maybe in a different market, it's not such hard work, and so you don't get as many points. Living wages, that's a good example of that. Here in the UK, in the States, places like that, where there is a real standard of living wages, people sign up to that. They as a company, they can already join that. The government has a standard minimum as well. You know, so it's easier necessarily, and I use that word cautiously, easy, because nothing is easy, but you know, it's easier to evidence that, it's easier to pursue that versus in a developing market potentially where those kinds of things aren't so readily available, aren't so clear cut. And so if someone does that, they've got to do so much research to understand how to benchmark it, and a lot of work to put that in. And I don't know whether sometimes our point system matches that necessarily. So I think that's not necessarily a blind spot, but maybe it's a challenge. And I think actually the standards team it's something that they're working on as we look to the evolution of the standards anyway. And that is one thing to sort of shift away from the real specificity of a hugely long questions based system into something that can be more broadly applicable. But that's the only challenge I sometimes see is whether we're, you know, and obviously you're a bit biased when you're working with that company because you become interested in them, but whether we capture the effort that people are putting in. But I think we're probably, I mean, I'm a talker, but I think you might be as well, Marcel. But so I think we probably need to start to think about stopping the conversation, sadly. But one quick last question, away from the meaty topics of policy and global perspective you have. I mean, I don't know how you hold it all in your head, but on a daily basis, or maybe not daily, interpret this as you will. What kind of brings you joy about what you do?
Oof, that's a very good question. I think, yeah, I think when you see the result of our work, when legislation is passed, or when we see a company's behavior change, when we see the benefit the company is generating in practice, when we are in the field, when you are talking to consumers or community members or suppliers, when we are living the experience of being part of this movement, this is very rewarding and energizing, as well as when we see the tremendous social capital that we have built globally. So this is not a network of businesses that have a purpose in common only. This is a community made by people. So business leaders, workers. So when you see the energy in different events, gatherings, conversations, when we see difficult moments as the pandemic that we've gone through, or when we see different tragedies that sadly happen across the planet, and we see the mobilization of this community and the power of these people together to overcome these challenges, like we just saw in Syria and Turkey, the earthquake, and we saw BLAB global community summing up efforts, mobilizing resources to support vulnerable people. This is the type of thing that really energizes and brings joy when you see that we are really part of something bigger and something that is truly changing the rules of the game and changing people's culture and behavior. So it's amazing. Thank you for asking, Bruno. But before we close, I would love to hear from you as well. What brings you joy in this important and key role that you have?
I mean, Lots of things bring me joy, but right now this conversation has brought me joy because it brings me a broader perspective on what's going on. And I think working for an organization, as you said, that is part of this bigger global movement, you know, me myself, I'm just a small part of it, obviously. But I think it brings me joy to see those companies, see their passion, and then meet people like yourself who are on that kind of broader perspective, and still know that that energy goes right through from that kind of grassroots stuff right through to that bigger policy change. And I think that brings me joy, you know, to know that we are working in an organization that's doing something good and right, and knowing that there are a lot of people out there that are on the same page and doing it with us as well. The companies, the network, consumers, policymakers. You know, I think that that's a pretty amazing thing to be a part of, and that brings me joy.
Amazing. Thank you, Bruno. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to chat. And I think not only myself, but the all audience understood a bit more about the work that you do at the certification verification team. So I really, really appreciate and celebrate the work that you guys do, because that's the core and the foundation of this movement. Um, uh, we are wrapping up our conversation, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this chat. And remember to follow the hashtag We Go Beyond to discover all the activities taking place around the world to celebrate the B Corp month. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Marcel.
Thanks, Bruno.